Ninurta versus Nergal. For more than 3,000 years, the Mesopotamian civilization flourished in various forms and under diverse rulers. Generally considered one of the earliest organized civilizations on Earth, it began somewhere around 4000 BCE and continued all the way until the Roman Empire started to take over the known world. Almost every aspect of life for the range of people in Mesopotamia was influenced by their religion. It affected everything from daily activities to politics to the economy. Mesopotamian religion was extremely pantheistic and rather malleable over the centuries. There was not one set way that the gods and goddesses were thought of, and many different legends and myths presented dynamic views of even the individuals at the same time. The majority of them were envisioned much like humans. They had gender, got married and had children in the usual biological way, had emotions, thoughts, and responses very much like people, and had plenty of faults too. They were also described as having very human-like needs, including food, water, shelter, and personal support. The characteristics that made the gods and goddesses different from people, including their immortality and something called Melamu, which was a type of holy aura or glamour that was both mystical and sometimes frightening. Melamu was also found in temples but disappeared if any of the deities journeyed to the underworld. Of course, Mesopotamian deities were aligned with particular natural forces or abilities that were beyond the range of human understanding at the time. These included the sun, stars, moon, wind, water, weather, animals, both real and imagined, and even activities like agriculture and writing. Even though they shared many traits with people, they were also considered far off and untouchable. There was no personal relationship between people and gods they worshipped. Instead, they existed mainly to be worshipped and sacrificed to. This was primarily to make sure that the gods and goddesses stayed happy with the people down below and did not cause horrific things to happen to them. Some gods were kind, while others were quite volatile of temper. Some were even well known for making bad decisions and leading humans to experience many life difficulties. Even though they were aligned with important things, most people saw the deities as living a life of leisure. After all, the human creation myth even indicates that the earliest gods made people do the work on Earth for them. Therefore, the deities could relax, sleep, and simply enjoy themselves with good food and comfort. Perhaps because they were so spoiled, they often reacted negatively when people did not worship them and make sufficient offerings. Then they would get angry and cause things like natural disasters, illnesses, and other types of bad luck. The earliest cuneiform writing frequently told stories of how the gods and goddesses behaved and their associations with particular city temples. The concept of a patron deity was well accepted across Mesopotamia. For example, in Uruk, the people mainly worshipped An and the goddess Inanna. In Nippur, they worshipped the high god of earth, Enlil. And at Eridu, they focused on Enki, the god who controlled fresh water found underground. Different cities adopted different gods in order to raise themselves in the standing of the political world. After all, if your city had the blessing of the higher god, it would make sense that people would see it as very important. One example of this was Babylon, which was not very important around 3000 BCE, but rose in prominence later on. As different lands were conquered and rulership changed, the culture associated with Babylon became more popular in the 3rd millennium BCE. At that time, there was approximately 3,600 different gods and goddesses listed in various records and stories from Sumer. It makes sense that when Sumerian power fell to Babylonian might, many of those deities were pushed aside or assimilated into the ones worshipped by new people. Therefore, An became Anu, Enki transformed into Ea, Inanna was then Ishtar, and Utu turned into Shamash. Some of the gods, like Enlil, were simply adopted by the Babylonians because they did not have an existing deity who fit the same description. However, he was supplanted by Marduk as the high leader of the world and the universe. Simply put, to the conqueror goes not only the spoils, but also the decision about what gods and goddesses are worshipped. The cities already contained many fine temples and worshipped sites, but they grew in number and included what archaeologists called cultic centers. In general, no one would worship a god or goddess at home because they could only interact with the deities through priests. There were, however, personal gods that people could have a more ready access to. In some ways, this would be like praying to a saint for intervention with one of the gods or goddesses. Other supernatural beings also existed in the religious beliefs of Mesopotamians. There were both positive and negative demons who would do what the gods and goddesses wanted them to. Some demons were originally deities who were killed by other gods and goddesses, which is the only way that they could be slain. They may mete out punishment, cause diseases, kill someone, or affect the dreams. Many of them were shown as part animal and part human in ancient artwork. Some of them were believed to be spirits of dead humans as well. Although they were mostly under the control of the gods, the people also believed that the gods could protect them from demons if they so choose. People could perform rituals or make offerings in an attempt to get this protection. The representation of gods and goddesses throughout the history of Mesopotamia remained quite similar. There was both direct sculpture or paintings of different deities, and they were also represented symbolically in both artwork and early writing. Most looked just like people, except that they were larger and frequently wore crowns with horns on them. Of course, the artists who created these statues or other depictions used the finest materials, including gold, lapis lazuli, and other precious things. When shown only with their symbols, gods and goddesses could be an actual object they were associated with, or a particular written symbol. For example, Ashur was shown as a dagger, Enlil with a net, Marduk with a spade, and Nabu with a cuneiform wedge. Their symbols were associated with the things that they could control and rule over as part of the Mesopotamian pantheon. Ninurta, the ancient Sumerian and Akkadian god of the south wind, hunting and war, was frequently revealed in stories recorded in 2000 BCE. Ninurta, who was closely associated with Nimrod from the Christian Bible, Ningirsu and Pabilsag, was part of the specific deities worshipped in Larak and Girsu communities in Sumer. At first, this hero god specialized in agriculture, before the entire collection of early civilizations became more involved in war and conflict. As Mesopotamia attempted to expand its borders to conquest and force, Ninurta became increasingly associated with war. Like many of the gods in the Sumerian pantheon, Ninurta had a questionable lineage. At some points, he was considered the son of the high god and goddess Enlil and Ninlil. Other texts put him under Enlil and Ninursag. The goddess he took as a wife was also up for debate, depending on which text you looked at. Most commonly, he was married to the goddess Gula, who he was associated with. The visual representations of Ninurta show him as a strong man with a bow and arrow and Sharur, his named mace, which was said to have the powers of speech and critical thinking. Occasionally, the artist also gave him wings that were spread up high. Others gave him a steed that looks like a lion with a scorpion tail. Of course, the artistic depictions of his association with agriculture leave out the more militant aspects of his image. He was considered great, yet flawed in a very human way. As time went on, new civilizations adopted the gods and goddesses from the old ones. Around 8859 BCE, the Assyrians and Neo-Assyrians adopted Ninurta as a deity associated still with protection and military might. He was inserted into their pantheon as the son of Assur, a prominent god. They built a very large ziggurat in Kalhu, one of the central cities of that time. Interestingly enough, the higher god Assur seem to have been worshipped on the same level as the new god Ninurta. They were artistically rendered together with the winged disc, associated with the most powerful deities. The origin and importance of Ninurta. As mentioned above, Ninurta was first imagined in Sumer as one of the sons of the highest god and goddess in the pantheon. When divergent story claims that his mother was a goat instead, around 2100 BCE, a leader named Gudea of Lagash chose Ninurta, using his former name of Ningirsu as the focus for his worship. He also named his successor after this god. This leader was responsible for building a massive temple to honor him and writing the story of the associated dream on terracotta cylinders that would come to be called the Gudea cylinders. Today, these still remain the longest pieces of writing that came out of ancient Sumer. The later epic of Anzu from Babylon, which also existed around the year 2000 BCE, identifies this early manifestation of Ninurta as a god of war. His name was not changed to this final form yet. It would take another 1,000 years or so for that to happen completely. The older name remained in usage for some Sumerians, but Mesopotamia as a whole used Ninurta from the 2nd millennium BCE onward. Throughout all of his existence, in the spiritual beliefs of these ancient people, he was associated both with agriculture and military protection. Because of Ninurta's agricultural roots, he was often worshipped or honored for his contributions to the relatively high degree of farming technology understood and used by the Sumerians. Many of these focused on effective irrigation techniques, using constructed canals, dams, reservoirs, and sluice systems. The existence of these mechanisms or construction projects and the associated tools found indicated that these ancient people are quite sufficient to using systems of measurement, levels, topographic mapping, and architectural planning to create what they needed to maximize their produce yields. The Sumerians actually had a type of recorded farmer's almanac that would share best planting, irrigation, and crop management techniques with educated farmers across the land. This so-called almanac was first developed around 1700 and existed until 1500 BCE. It was written in a rather creative format, speaking directly to farmers, who would then teach their sons how to improve the land and the crops. It explained everything from soil preparation to planting techniques, preventing birds and other pests, and considerable harvesting methods. All told, it includes only 35 lines. The final one gives praise to Ninurta for delivering this information to whoever wrote it down originally. Giving farming instructions directly from a god would undoubtedly ensure that they were followed. Not only was Ninurta lauded for his skill with agriculture and his protective capabilities during wartime, but he was generally considered a hero similar to Marduk or Heracles, later Hercules in Rome. He was associated with triumphing over opposition, taming chaos, and succeeding at the majority of things he did. The Myths of Nanuta. One of the most prominent religious myths in ancient Sumer was called the Epic of Anzu. This is a tale about how a legendary bird called Anzu, which was massive in size, swooped up to where the high god Enlil reigned and stole the tablets of destiny. Not only do these give power to whoever holds them, but they also contain all the information about what will become of the mortals on earth and the gods themselves. The Anzu bird steals the tablets, flies away, and leaves Enlil asking other gods for help to pursue him and get the tablets back. Ninurta is the only one who answers the call. He takes his bow and fires an arrow at the fleeing bird. However, Anzu uses the tablets of destiny to revert the arrow to its base components, cane, stone, and feather. His bow likewise turns back into the branch of a tree, and its string to the sinew in the sheep from whence it came. Luckily, Ninurta was able to call upon the powers of the south wind, which blew at Anzu so strongly that his wings ripped off and he plummeted to the ground. Ninurta kills the bird and retrieves the tablets of destiny for his father. Another Mesopotamian poem called The Exploits of Ninurta tell a tale of this god hero confronting Asag, who is a feared demon associated with disease. Surprisingly, Sharor, the intelligent mace held by Ninurta, starts the fight. He fills Ninurta's head with courage and the belief that he is strong and skillful enough to beat the demon. So Ninurta heads down to the underworld for the battle. Asag apparently heard that he was coming and gathered together a troop of rock monsters and plants to help defend him. At first, Ninurta runs away, but Sharor is there again to remind him how he beat many other horrific things in the past. In the end, the god hero destroys the demon. While this sounds like a positive outcome, it causes a considerable problem in the underworld and on land itself. Asag and his rocks and plants were responsible for blocking the primeval waters from flooding the land above. When they were defeated, they no longer performed their duty, and a horrific upwelling of evil water happened. Again, however, Ninurta saved the day by piling up their corpses as a type of dam to keep the waters from the living world. Now that Ninurta was claimed victorious and the protector of the farmland, towns and cities above, Ninmar, his mother in this tale, comes down to earth to celebrate his achievement. He in turn dedicates this rocky mountain that he created from the corpses in her honor. He also changes her name from Magnificent Queen to Lady of the Mountain, or Ninhursag. Ninurta was responsible for destroying other odd creatures and evil beings in a host of other myths from ancient Mesopotamia. Some of these included a palm tree king, a six-headed wild ram, the seven-headed snake, and strong copper. All of them were representations of important elements of life in this ancient civilization. He fought both sentient beings and inanimate objects, like the Magillam boat, the conveyance used to ferry dead souls into the underworld. In many ways, the entire collection of stories about Ninurta's trials and tribulations mimic later epics of other god heroes, like Heracles. Also, like this later figure, Ninurta was given very human characteristics that were not all positive. Sometimes he falls victim to his pride or ego. In one tale called Ninurta and the Turtle, which occurs sometime after he defeats Anzu and returns the Tablets of Destiny, Ninurta is upset that he was appreciated for such a small achievement. Instead, he wanted to be known for greater things that affected the whole world in positive ways. Because of this pride and dismissal of the honors, Enki creates a massive turtle to bite Ninurta and drag him down into a pit. As a lumbering turtle gnaws on his feet, the higher god basically mocks him in order to force a humbler attitude. Even though part of the story is missing, the main point seems to be that people should take appreciation where it is given, be thankful for their abilities as they are, recognize their limitations, and not focus primarily on always achieving higher degrees of glory. Neo-Assyrian Ninurta. Ninurta did go on to much greater things than simply killing Anzu, however. Once he was assimilated into the Assyrian parent, he was given a greater role, especially when it came to military might and protection. The leader, named Tukulti-Ninurta I, took on the god hero's name around 1240 BCE, in order to honor him with the responsibility of the battle victories that the king achieved during his time in power. Additional leaders in the 1100s and 900s BCE also gave this type of honor to Ninurta. Ashur-nasirpal II, who constructed the capital Kalhu, gave the most honor and glory to Ninurta out of all the rest. He had a massive temple constructed as a place of worship. All of the walls were designed to show the many triumphs and achievements of the god. For people who have studied the Neo-Assyrian Empire and Mesopotamia in general, one of the Kalhu temple reliefs showing Ninurta battling with Anzu has become one of the most iconic and frequently printed images from that time. The temple gave people a place to worship the god. remained a place of religious ceremony and power, also invited the homeless, poor, orphans, and migrant workers inside for shelter and comfort. In the Christian Bible, Ninurta was known as Nimrod. He was described as a mighty hunter who presided primarily in the great city of Kala, which was another name for Kalhu. There are some disagreements about who Nimrod actually is, with some scholars claiming he is a leader named Tukulti Ninurta I, instead of the god hero himself. This is dismissed in most cases because the leader was not associated with Kalhu, according to all other historical documents. When the 700s BCE came around, Ninurta began to lose some of his power and influence. The leader Sargon II moved the civilization's capital away from Kalhu. His focus on education and writing pushed the god Nebu to the forefront of religious practice. His successor brought back Ninurta, and he once again enjoyed considerable status throughout the 600s BCE. Unfortunately, in 612 BCE, the entire Neo-Assyrian Empire, then ruled by Ashurbanipal, was looted and destroyed by outside forces. While Ninurta met the same fate, the influence of his tales carried on through other cultures who adopted some of the same ideas into their own myths and legends. Nergal. As many gods did in the ancient Mesopotamian world, Nergal, who was sometimes known as Irra, started out associated with agriculture in the early years of the early dynastic period. In the centuries starting in 2900 BCE, he was most closely attached to the city Cuthah, and a large temple called Meslam was erected there to honor him. Nergal quickly transformed into the god of war, death, and destruction. While it may seem like a deity of agriculture would be more closely linked to life, his iconic representation was the hot summer sun that would dry out and scorch crops rather than help them grow. This type of heat and blinding light was, to ancient Mesopotamians, a manifestation of Nergal's anger. This translated into a more general association with death, pestilence, and violence. His purpose in the pantheon was refined until between 2017 and 50 BCE. Nergal had shed his early agricultural roots almost completely. Different texts from back then indicate that he shared a purpose with a god named Irra from Babylon. Originally, they were two separate things. As time went on and the civilizations merged together or fully, they became interchangeable entities that symbolized the same forces. Eventually, they were considered the same god completely. Most of the artistic representations of Nergal show him as a strong man wearing flowing robes, who is walking quickly and stepping on a person with his leading foot. He has both a sharp scimitar and a large mace, topped with a figure of a lion's head. He is associated both with that large cat and strong bulls. These would be two of the creatures in Mesopotamian life that were most dangerous and deadly. Like many of the other lesser gods, Nergal was considered the son of the high god Enlil and goddess Ninlil. Also, like many other deities in the pantheon, his lineage was up for debate. Some records showed that Belet Ili, or Nintor, the goddess responsible for creating humans, was his mother instead. Nergal was paired with a host of different goddess wives or consorts over the years. These included Las, Mami, Ninshubur, and Ereshkigal. Respectively, they were simply two small local goddesses, the goddess of the East and the queen of the dead. Although he was associated heavily with death and the underworld, he was not exceptionally feared by believers. People would ask him for protection at times. Originally, he was worshipped mostly in Cuthah city, but like most other local deities, his followers spread throughout the entire Mesopotamian civilization over time. Babylonians and Assyrians also believed in him, although they gave him different names. Nergal's purpose and use. Since Nergal was associated with destruction and death, people usually did not call upon him for assistance. However, he was used in a protective role, or attempts were made to appease him so that people would get relief from negative events. He was always depicted as a strong force with his weapons at his side. He did not feel remorse or guilt for any of the destruction that he wrought. However, there was nothing judgmental or punishing about the things he did. It was simply his nature to move and act that way. He was somehow excused for destroying Babylon or doing any of the other bad things because he was simply temperamental and lacked sufficient control of himself. When he did represent death, Nergal is not associated with all forms or reasons for it occurring. Instead, he had associations with war, plagues, and pestilence. Any diseases he caused had a demonic influence, which aligned with the general beliefs of the Mesopotamian people at that time. All these negative things that destroyed human life were brought about by negative gods like Nergal, while the others worked alongside people to fulfill the cosmic plan. One representation of this idea came in an 800 BCE manuscript called the Roth of Error, which was another name for Nergal. Roth of Error's story. This tale opens with Irra feeling bored because nothing interesting is going on. His weapons are dusty, and they are complaining about inaction themselves. Because his mason scimitar are actively bothering him, Irra talks with Isham, his advisor, about what he can do to end the stagnation. Despite him telling Irra not to do it, he decides to attack Babylon anyway. In the story, this is considered a rather foolhardy task. Since Babylon was under the direct protection of Marduk, Irra tricks Marduk into leaving the city unprotected by making fun of the other god's wardrobe. Basically, he tells Marduk that his clothes are very old and shabby, and he should go get some new ones. Marduk leaves to see his tailor, and Irra starts to destroy the entire city. People are killed, buildings razed to the ground, and everything else is damaged considerably. Isham attempts to stop Irra, but the god ignores him once again. Eventually, however, he gets tired of his destruction and offers Babylon a prophecy. He says that a great leader will show up one day and protect all the people much better than Marduk ever did. Once Irra leaves Babylon and goes back to talk with the other gods, he used his angry personality traits as the only excuse for why he decided to destroy the city and kill so many people. Taking the fact that he stopped before everything was utterly gone as a good sign, Isham suggested that Babylon would rise again and flourish. The final lines of this tale include much respect and approval for Irra. Why would a story like this be told, and why would Nergal be excused from the destruction that he wrought? Historians suggest that this type of destruction and death came about frequently in the centuries around 1200 to 900 BCE, because Babylon and the surrounding area was frequently invaded by nomadic groups like the Suteans. To the people who lived there, these invasions may have seemed entirely random and without real cause, so they blamed it on an angry god. It was a way to make sense of the bad things that happen in the world, while still maintaining that most gods and goddesses wanted the best for the people. The idea is that a holy prophecy spoke of the success and improvement of the city would give the people hope. Nergal and Ereshkigal's marriage. Another story that featured the god of destruction and death related to his marriage to the goddess of the underworld. This was written around 1400 BCE, if the records from the Amarna letters of Egypt are the primary source. A copy of the same story was found at Sultan Tepe and dates to around 700 BCE. Apparently the tale was quite popular, because another version was found at another site, with date expectations somewhere around 630 to 540 BCE. This legend gives an example of how the powerful god, Enki, who created humankind and symbolizes wisdom, attempted to temper Nergal's destructive ways by sending them to the underworld to get married to Ereshkigal. When the gods held a banquet and invited all the other deities to attend, the goddess of the underworld was unable to come because she had to stay down there and watch over things. Of course, the other gods could not go to the underworld because they would not get stuck down there forever. Still, Ereshkigal wanted to take part in the feast, so she sent her son, Namtar, to go to the banquet and bring her back some of the food. Namtar shows up, is afforded appropriate respect by all in attendance, except for Nergal. Instead of getting the punishment due to him, Nergal is ignored and Namtar is sent back to the underworld to tell his mother about the disrespect. Ereshkigal gets very angry at this news. and sends another message back to the gods above for them to deliver Nergal to her so she can destroy. Enki finds this request reasonable and sends Nergal down to the underworld to answer for his disrespect. He does not, however, go alone. Enki provides Nergal with an escort of 14 demons to help him get through the 7 gates of hell. He makes the entire journey successfully. Ereshkigal lets him through all the gates without challenge and plans to kill him once he reaches her throne. Nergal senses a trap and posts his demon escorts at each gate to keep them open, so he has a path of retreat. He goes to the throne room, fights with Namtar, and attempts to cut off Ereshkigal's head with his axe. She convinces him to spare her life by offering herself in marriage. They kiss, promise to be true to each other forever, and make their home in the underworld happily ever after. Unfortunately, Nergal is too high-spirited and volatile to be happy in the underworld forever. Enki allows him to leave with the help of the demons, who are still holding the gates open. He and Ereshkigal lived together for 6 months in the underworld, and apart for the other 6 months, while Nergal orchestrated wars, destruction, and diseases in the human world above. The symbolism contained in this story may have been a way of explaining why wars mostly happened in the more comfortable seasons of the year, when troop movements and sieges were easier to do. Also, it boosted the people's appreciation of Enki by telling them that he made every possible effort to get rid of or rein in Nergal's temper. Both destruction and protection from Nergal. It did not matter what time of year it was, or whether the people believed that Nergal was currently residing on Earth or in the underworld. They still called upon him for help with demons and evil spirits. Quite a few different prayers mentioned him specifically for his help with fighting off underworld creatures, and especially with exorcisms. Priests in Babylon would call upon Nergal to help with cases of possession, as they understood them. He was considered an integral part of the ceremony, along with a variety of other gods who were generally more positive. Still, it was his association with destruction that made him a powerful ally when people tried to avoid that very thing. In the 1300s BCE, the Hittites adopted him as the god of plague and renamed him Aplu. Instead of asking for protection from a plague or similar destructive force, the people would pray desperately to appease the god, so he would stop wreaking havoc on the living. The similarities between Aplu and the older Nergal personality continued, however. He would do all the bad things he wanted until he grew tired of the action.